Hello, and welcome to the North Asia Cape Need to Know series. I'm Amber Older. The North Asia Cape is committed to helping New Zealand businesses internationalize in China, Japan, and Korea. As part of this work, we are proud to host the inaugural North Asia Cape Fellow. He is Professor David Shambaugh of the George Washington University in the United States. Professor Shambaugh is an internationally regarded authority and award-winning author on contemporary China and the international relations of Asia. He's visited or lived in China every year since 1979 and has traveled extensively throughout Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Professor David Shambaugh joins me now. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thanks for being here. So first, by way of context, in your 2016 book, China's Future, you outlined 4 options for how China will move domestically under Xi Jinping. Could you just briefly describe those options and explain which one in the current economic and geopolitical climate is either most likely to happen or is indeed underway now?
Sure. So I sketch out 4, as you say, from sort of more repressive to least repressive. The first I call neo-totalitarianism. Second is hard authoritarianism. Third is soft authoritarianism. And the fourth is what I call semi-democracy. So that's a spectrum. China has, since 2009, been on the hard authoritarian path, even before Xi Jinping, in fact, became the top leader. It started under the last 3 years of his predecessor, Hu Jintao. But we're now in year 9 of hard authoritarianism, you might say. But if you look back, Amber, to 1978, when China really began its whole reform and opening period, we've seen an oscillation back and forth between hard and soft authoritarianism. What the Chinese call Fang, to open, that's soft authoritarianism, and Shou, to close, that's hard authoritarianism. We've had, I think, 7 or 8 cycles back and forth between the two. Usually, the predominant one is soft authoritarianism. It lasts about 6 or 7 years, and then the communist leadership gets nervous and cracks down for usually 1 to 2 years, and they go back to soft for another 6 to 7. So it's sort of this 2-step forward, 1-step back pattern. That's what we've seen, as I say, all the way back to 1978. So this period of hard authoritarianism, as I say, is prolonged. Normally it's 1 to 2 years. We're now in year 9, and no signs at all of moving back to soft, quite to the contrary. And when I wrote the book, this was before the 19th Party Congress last year, and there was, the option and certainly the hope amongst many Chinese, not just foreigners, that China would return to a more soft, open, more liberal, with Chinese characteristics, direction. But we've not seen that at all. Quite to the contrary, Xi Jinping is extremely illiberal and very hostile to opening. They've closed down many of the civil society sphere, NGOs, media has tightened up, higher education, not to mention human rights and religion, ethnic groups, Tibet, Xinjiang. I mean, there's just an across-the-board sweeping crackdown in China. It's the worst it's been since the post-Tiananmen period of the early 1990s. So China's very much in the hard authoritarian, and in fact tilting towards the neo-totalitarian option, which I included in the book simply as a conceptual possibility. I thought we had to at least consider the fact that this Leninist regime might get more repressive. I didn't think it would, but it is. So this is not exactly encouraging from a political standpoint. And from a, foreign Western liberal standpoint, if what one wants for China is not just foreign Westerners who want it, many Chinese would prefer a much more liberal direction for their country, even under one-party Communist Party rule. As I say, Communist Party has been in power, now almost, since 1949, but they've had long periods of soft authoritarian, relatively liberal, open periods.
And you've also said that from an economic standpoint, for China to truly grow economically as a stable world leader in the global scheme of things, that China needs to become a high-value, innovative, outward-looking society, precisely in order for its economy to grow in a stable and enduring way. Can you speak to that?
Exactly. So, a soft authoritarian future is not simply a wish that foreigners or Chinese have. Empirical social science evidence tells us that without it, on the political side and the social side, they're going to have a very difficult time navigating through what's known as the middle income trap. So China is in the middle income strata of economies. The World Bank divides economies into three categories: developed, middle income, and developing. And once you graduate, from developing to middle income, of course, the hope and the goal is to continue to modernize and evolve up the value-added ladder. But that's the point. You have to add value to your economy. You have to become an innovative economy, not simply an export processing economy. So China finds itself in the same place that 101 countries since 1960 have found themselves in, World Bank data. Of that 101, only 12 have made it through the trap and become developed economies. Hence the term trap. 89 out of 101 never get out of it. So China's in it. China knows that it needs to innovate its way out of it, but they're trying to do it without political liberalization. Of those 12, I might say, every one of them politically, not only liberalized, democratized. Of the 12, 10 were authoritarian, autocratic states when they were in the trap. By the time they emerged out, every one of them was one form or another of a democracy. So there is a direct correlation in the history, it's not just social science theory, in the history of most countries in the world since 1960, that you need to open up socially and politically in order to open up, you might say, economically. So China, that's the big challenge for China, and the Chinese Communist Party is saying, no, we're going to do it our way, and we're going to be the first. So we'll see. It's a great experiment.
On that note, you talk about how, despite the confidence of China's position as a global leader and the confidence of the Chinese leadership, you've actually noted how the hard authoritarianism approach really reflects a deep instability within the leadership. Can you speak to that?
Well, I don't know about instability, but it does reflect an apparent insecurity. Confident regimes don't need to repress. They don't need to crack down. Allowing your citizens, space, intellectual space, organizational space, freedom, relative freedoms is a sign of a confident leadership, I would argue. So from that perspective, Xi Jinping leadership in the Communist Party is acting in an extremely, almost paranoid fashion. They're frightened. You can read their internal assessments. They live in the shadow of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the East European communist states. That's still very much in their mind. They've done very systematic studies about that, plus the so-called color revolutions in Central Asia, the beginning of the Arab Spring. They look out on the international landscape and are quite nervous. And so they're doing what they think is appropriate to stay in power. And that's the bottom line, staying in power for the Communist Party. They've been in power. They're now the second longest ruling party in the world after North Korea. And they're about to have their anniversary of being in power since 1949 next year. But, political parties and regimes are like plants. If you don't water the plant and expose it to sunshine and light on occasion, it's going to atrophy and die. And Leninist parties are very much that way. In fact, I wrote a previous book called China's Communist Party, Atrophy and Adaptation. Atrophy is a condition that all Leninist parties have. The question is how and whether they adapt. And the Chinese Communist Party was adapting in the soft authoritarian way I described up until 2009. So they could go back to that, or they can stay where they are. That's their choice. But I'm just arguing in the book, if they keep on the hard authoritarian path, they're going to have a very difficult time getting through the middle income trap and changing the structural foundations of their economy.
Professor David Shambaugh, thank you so much.
Oh, quite welcome. Nice talking with you, Amber.